Welcome back everyone. In this lesson we're going to cover the concept of variables. Now the use of variables in Python is pretty much like any other programming language that you're going to be using, but there are some nuances that you need to be aware of. We'll cover the topics of why variables are so important in any coding language, how we make use of them. We'll talk about naming conventions, how we actually do calculations of the variables, and also how we can assign multiple variables, multiple values at the same time. Let's get onto our coding screen and get practicing, because that's the best way to learn. Okay, so the first thing I want to discuss about variables is how you name them. Now, different people have different methods that they use to name their variables. Some people prefer to use capital letters. Some people start the variable with a capital letter. Some people will use no underscores at all in the naming of their variables. For example, they may say, okay, let's call first name, we'll call it this, or we may call it all first name in capital letters, which is a bit strange, to be honest. You really don't want it shouting out the screen at you. Some people will just use lowercase, which is fine. But I generally advocate using snake method, which is using lowercase but stringing the words together using an underscore. Okay, kind of looks neater to me, and it's generally acceptable as a means by which you name your variables. Okay, so in this example that we're going to use, just to explain how useful variables are, we're going to work out the circumference of a circle. Okay, so if I say the variable name is going to be called just circ, right? And circ is basically pi times the diameter of a circle. So we'll say pi times diameter, right? So we've got three variables there. We've got circ, which is going to be the result of our calculation. Pi, which we know to be 3.14. We'll stick to 3.14 to keep it simple. And the diameter of the circle. But we don't know what pi and diameter is yet. At this point, all we've said is the variable circ, the circumference, is equal to pi times the diameter of the circle. So we need to declare pi and diameter. So we'll say pi equals 3.14. And we'll say diameter equals, say, 10, right? Just for the sake of this example. So now we have two variables being declared here, pi, and we've given it a value of 3.14, and diameter, we've given it a value of 10. So we've named it using lowercase variable names, and we've assigned it a value. And the variable is basically a container for that value. And we've declared our formula. Now, the great thing about using variables rather than just saying circ equals 3.14 times 10 and getting Python to work that out is that if the diameter was to change, or you want to try it with a different diameter, you'd be going through changing this every single time, this formula. However, by declaring the formula once and having the ability to change this diameter value, you'll change the output of this particular formula every time. So let's see that working. So I'm going to print the output of this, okay? We're going to say print circ, okay? So if we run that, we see that Python's worked out that the circumference of this circle is 31.4 centimeters, for example, okay, if we're using centimeters as a unit. However, say we had a larger circle and the diameter was 20. All we do is just change the assignment of diameter. We run that again, and we've got a new result. So we've now made use of variables. The only thing we're doing is reassigning a value to diameter. Now this value could be coming in from a file for 100 different circles. And every time it comes in, your formula doesn't change and your print statement doesn't change. It's basically just saying print the value of this variable circ, which has been calculated as pi times the diameter of the circle. And it's taking whatever's been assigned to these variables. So now we've avoided having to go print 3.14 times 10, print 3.14 times 20, for however many circles we want to calculate it for. We've just got one script there, and we can take this value as an input from the user if we wanted to. Now in this example, our formula is really simple. But as you get into your coding and you deal with real world problems, you'll find very complex issues to resolve. You may have hundreds of lines of code acting upon the values that you're feeding into it. You don't want to have to rewrite that code for every single value that you need to calculate. Your code, your formula that you define, which could be, as I say, hundreds of lines of code or thousands of lines of code, will just act upon whatever you fed into it. So variables give your coding flexibility, reusability. They also allow your code to be readable. By having the ability to name your variables meaningfully, you're able to then explain your code through it. I recently picked up a 3,500 line piece of code for a financial report. And had that person who coded it not use meaningful names for their variables, it would take me probably 5 or 6 times longer to decipher it. But because they've named their variables in a useful manner, I was able to look at what they're doing and understand their code far easier than had they not done that. Alongside your variables, I would highly recommend that you use comments. Now in Python, comments you can use by using hash or a pound sign, as you'd call it in the US. So I would say here, and I personally, when I do comments, I use capital letters in the comments only, never in the variables. And I'll say calculate circumference, right? Now, what that tells me is that this piece of code is now going to do that calculation. And it makes sense because there's a comment there and there's meaningful names for the variables. So use that tip, always comment your code. Now it's important to note that unlike other languages, Python doesn't require you to declare the variables before you use them. So in some languages, you'll see that if you're going to assign 3.14 to pi has to be declared as a float. Okay. In Python, you don't need to do that because you can reassign the variable to any data type that you wish at any point. So let me give you an example of that. Okay, let's just clear this. So we said pi is 3.14 and diameter is 20. Python automatically looks at that and says, right, this variable pi is a float because it's got a number with a decimal point in it. And it will say diameter 20, so it's an integer. And you know that because if you do this, you print the type. And when we print something, we put inside open and close brackets. If I say, I want the type of pi, we're basically saying, give me the data type of this variable. And I run that now. It tells me that it's a float. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to reassign pi. I'm going to say it's right. I'm going to give it a string value. And I'm going to print the type of pi again. So I'm going to run that now. You see that initially pi is assigned 3.14 and the type, Python sees the type as a float. But once I reassign it a string value, Python sees it as a string data type. And that's one of the flexibilities of Python. You don't need to declare a variable as a specific data type at the start. You can reassign it anything you want and it will change the data type that is applied to that variable. Now, one of the other things we can do in Python is assign multiple values to multiple variables in one go. So we could say, for example, pi, comma diameter equals 3.14 10. Right, so what we're doing here is saying that 3.14 goes into pi variable and 10 goes into the diameter variable. and we can print that. So if you run this all now, you'll see that it's printing the pi and then it's printing the diameter. Now later on we're going to study the concept of lists within Python. But just to give you a short example here, we could say our circle vars equals, and we create a list, and we do that by using square brackets. Right, so now what we've done, we've said this list contains two values, 3.14 and 20. We can print that. We'll run that. You see that there's the two values and it's got the square brackets around it because it's a list. Now, how do you then pick out the individual values within that list? Well, you use an index. So you say the first value is value 0 and the second value is value 1. And you can do your calculation based upon that. So you could say circ equals circle vars 0 multiplied by circle vars 1, and then print circ. If I run that now, you'll see that it's taken it's the last output that we've got is that calculation for circ. And what it's done, it's taken this list, taken the first item in that list, which is indexed with a 0, and the second item in that list, indexed with a 1. The indexes start with a 0 in Python, and it's calculated the result, circ, by multiplying the two together. But that was a very short introduction to lists, but we'll go into it in far more depth later on in another lesson. So that's a brief introduction into variables. The best way for you to understand is to practice, and I'll see you in the next lesson.